and welcome back to another episode of the Real Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jacob O'Connor. Real Conversations is a podcast for those dedicated to doing hard things and living a meaningful life. Today, I'm joined for the first time in nearly 2 years with Robert Gerlach. How you doing, Rob?
I thought you were just going to say for the first time ever.
No, this is your third time on.
Oh, this is my third time?
Yeah. Yeah.
So where does that put me in the rankings?
You're really far behind Grant.
Oh, God. I'm always trailing Grant.
Grant's been on a lot.
He's better than me at podcasting.
You're ahead of Bryce Lopp because he's only been on. No,
Okay.
actually, no, you're not. He's been on 4 times.
Okay.
So yeah, you're,
This is humbling experience. But I am beating Tom Gentile, who's only been on once.
Wow. I would love to see a chart where it just says Rob Gerlach is beating Tom Gentile, and then it's like click and you'll see the metric.
It's like the only thing I can say that in probably, but I will take whatever I can get.
Hey, take the wins, man. Take the wins. Yeah, you came on February 23rd, 2023. So almost exactly 2 years ago.
Nice.
So a lot has changed since then.
That's right.
You are married and you're having another child.
That's correct.
And your role within the university has changed and
Yep.
you're jacked and just everything's different now.
Yeah, I haven't worked out as much as I had been.
You had a good streak.
I had a hell of a streak. I mean, I was going to the gym at least 2 times a week for a long time there. And
It was more than that, honestly.
Yeah, we were going, I don't know, 2,
It was 3 to 4 or 5 for a good period there.
We were going hard.
Yeah. And hitting the sauna.
We did sauna a lot.
Dude, I almost died in there this week. It was so good.
I need to get back to the sauna.
It was so good.
I don't know if we're supposed to do bad shout outs, but I do not like the sauna at the Northwest Y because it just doesn't seem to get as hot. Like the style of sauna it is one of the bigger rooms, so it doesn't seem to get as hot.
Is that the one that we would go to occasionally? Because we would only lift at the Heskett or one of the Ys. Was that the Y we were going to?
No, I think we're going to a different Y.
Oh, okay.
We were going
downtown.
Yeah, we were going downtown.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that sauna.
It's like a bigger co-ed sauna out it's by the pool.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that. Plus, like a bigger room, people are opening the door more.
There's a lot of door opening.
Yeah, and then you're losing the heat.
And there's always that weird group of people having a conversation in the sauna, like when it's that big and their whole conversation takes over the entire sauna.
They're dominating, yeah.
But it's not even like a good conversation to eavesdrop on, so it's just rough.
Yeah, that's rough. Well, here's what I've been thinking about. This is where I figured we'd kind of start the conversation. In the last week, I've listened to probably almost 5 hours worth of John D. Rockefeller podcasts. Dear God.
A lot of John D. Rockefeller.
Yeah.
Is this all from Senra?
Yes.
Okay.
He's done 3 or 4 episodes, and I made a playlist on Spotify called like Best Business Podcast Episodes. It's just all Rockefeller. So far, it's just comprised of John D. Rockefeller.
Okay.
Dude, what a story.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar with it. I haven't listened to 5 straight hours this last week.
But I know you've listened to the Acquired episode. I'm sure you've listened to at least one of the Founders episodes.
Yeah, probably. I've listened to a lot of podcasts between then and now.
Okay, I'll give you the quick rundown. Hey guys, Jacob here. Real quick before we get back to the episode, I just want to take a quick second and say, if you guys are enjoying this episode, please make sure to share the link with a friend. You may have noticed I don't run any ads in the podcast. In fact, I don't make any money off the podcast. It's quite the contrary. Over the past 5 years, I've invested a lot of time, money, and effort into the growth of the show, trying to continually upgrade the equipment, bring on better guests, and just improve the overall quality of the podcast. So if you guys are enjoying this episode or if you enjoyed previous episodes, please share the link with a friend. Sending it to 1 or 2 people makes a huge difference for me on the back end. As always, I appreciate your guys' support. Let's get back into the episode. So he grew up in, I believe, Ohio, impoverished. His father was gone from the scene pretty frequently.
I almost asked you, was he a Bengals fan? But then I realized timeline-wise, I don't think that works out.
No,
continue.
That doesn't add up. Father was gone from the scene. He was the oldest child, so he took the head of the household responsibility. Never celebrated his birthday. This became a very popular thing amongst Rockefeller folklore. He celebrated Job Day, the day in which he first was able to earn his own way and take care of and provide for his family. And so every year he would celebrate that, but not his birthday.
That's pretty cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And so he started off, I believe he was like grocery and produce, but like market, supply chain, that type of thing.
Okay.
And they had him managing the books. He was like 13, 14 years old. And off the jump, just complete disdain for his employers, for the bosses, because since he was the one running the books, he noticed just how laissez-faire they were with all of the expenses, and this person charged that. And I mean, he would chase everything down to the penny, and then go back to the bosses and say, we're losing money here. Like, or we should have been like, more opportunity was there.
Was it, as I say, so he was always the stickler.
Yes.
With the books. He always looked at the accounts, made sure we weren't spending frivolously, kept things as low as possible.
Super tight. He was super tight with cost control. And eventually he was like, you know what, screw this. I don't want to work for these guys. Let me get my own partners and start my own business, because I already know this market and I can see the opportunity that's there. And so he did that, and it's going well. And him and his partners don't have a lot of capital, so they're borrowing from banks left and right. And they're growing really well, and Rockefeller's happy. But he's realizing that it's just going to continue to compound. He's going to get better and better at what he's doing as long as he continues to do that thing. So he wants to keep borrowing and growing the company. And his partners, at this point, they pivoted into oil. It was produce when they pivoted into oil. Like, he's 23 or 24 years old. And his partners are not feeling the same confidence that Rockefeller is. And so they start to constrain him. And they're like, no, we need to slow down. Let's really halt the brakes. We're making good money right now. Like, we're happy, we're content. And Rockefeller's like, he's just so convinced of what he could do with this, that he was like, no, we instead of having that disagreement in the business, back in those days, the contents of the business would go up to sale at an auction whenever the partners couldn't disagree and whenever the partners couldn't agree. And so the partners knew they had more money than Rockefeller. So they're like, yeah, of course we'll send this to auction. That way they could just buy Rockefeller out and then not have to deal with this annoying 24-year-old, 25-year-old at this time. And so they go to auction. But Rockefeller, who's meticulous and always thinking one step ahead, he had gone out to all of their competitors and said, hey, I see this opportunity here. This is going to happen. There's going to be a sale of this business, and I know exactly what we need to do with it. Will you back me? And so he goes into this auction where his two partners underestimate him and think he has no capital that he can bring to the table. And he has just an absolute war chest behind him that they don't know about. And so they start bidding, and eventually they're like, Rockefeller's not backing off. And the partners hit their limit at 700. Shoot, this is hard because
whatever it is, they hit their limit.
Yeah, they hit their limit. And they look at it and they go, John, this is your business, whatever. And they leave. And then at 25 years old, John becomes an owner of the largest oil company in the world at 25.
That's crazy.
Can you imagine being 25?
No. I cannot imagine being 25 and the owner of the largest oil company in the world.
And then just rocket ship from there.
Well, because he probably acquired all those people to back him, and he did it in silence because I believe...
Bad boys move in silence.
I would say Sinra always says bad boys move in silence. Mm-hmm. That's not a quote from Rockefeller, as he points out. I believe it's from Biggie Smalls, actually. It's from a rap song, I think. But he always says it about Rockefeller.
Right.
But it's interesting because that same mentality of, partners not having the same conviction as the individual who really believes in the mission of what they're doing,
right,
you see time and time again. So you see it in John D. Rockefeller, you see it in Sam Walton, you see it in Elon Musk.
Right.
So you see it in all these different places throughout time. So I got to ask you then, so who's the better entrepreneur? Is it John D. Rockefeller or Elon Musk?
Well, I don't know, man. That's hard.
I mean, they're different eras, different businesses, different regulatory schemes at the same time, which affects a lot of things.
I say John D. Rockefeller created the first monopoly. He is the reason that we have antitrust violations now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And wasn't he very, didn't he do a lot of charitable contributions with his money too? Wasn't that another thing?
Yes. So his thing was he believed that God put him on this earth to become the richest man in the world and acquire all the resources possible so that he could do the most possible good with those resources and allocate them before his death. So right before he died, I mean, he didn't give it all away. Obviously, he left it in trust and his son ended up taking over the business, whatever else. But he donated a ton of money and was always very focused on the charitable side of things. But it was almost like this, in the episode I just finished listening, whenever you were walking in, it was playing over the speakers. It's called 38 Letters from John D. Rockefeller that he wrote to his son as his son was taking over the business.
What was it? David Rockefeller, was that his son? I don't know. There was a David Rockefeller. I don't know if that's his son or grandson or where in the...
Yeah, I think it's John. It is John Jr.
Okay,
it's John Jr. Yeah, but in that he was talking about how he just felt like he was convinced that like it was a religious thing. He's like, I am here to do this from God. It's crazy.
If you think though, so go back to the auction. when he walks in, he knows how much money he's got and how many backers
Yeah.
he's got. It still takes a hell of a lot of conviction. Every time they call for that next iteration of money a little bit more, his hand goes up yet again, or he gives the nod or the wink or whatever he did to signal, yes, I'm still in. It's crazy, because then compare that with Elon Musk. I mean, when Elon is at SpaceX, and he puts a lot of money in SpaceX early on, and those rockets keep blowing up, and he sees literally his money blowing up in front of him. And there was always this, I don't remember, it was probably on Cinema, I don't remember what podcast it was, but they talk about how Elon was literally like doubled over in pain and anxiety because of how nervous he was, but yet he stayed with his conviction in SpaceX and continued to put more and more money in. And even when it was like their last round of money and he supposedly didn't have any more to put in, he found money to put in because he had that conviction that eventually it was all going to work out. So it's interesting that that's a trait that you see throughout a lot of these different entrepreneurs or founders that are successful.
And it was his first wife or his first girlfriend while he was starting that said he used to wake up in the middle of the night and just scream in agony.
Yeah.
Just literal pain. He compared running a startup to chewing on glass.
Yeah, it was some crazy analogy like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never chewed on glass, but
I can imagine it probably hurt,
Yeah, I would assume it's not good.
So, but if you remove the extreme success that those two examples have, there's so many people that would have that same conviction and then tumble, fall, crash, and then everyone would immediately point and say, see, that was stupid, don't do that. But then we also point at the people who did the exact same thing, but they had the better outcome. So like the input's almost the same as what I'm saying, but we praise one and the other one we look at and we're like, you were stupid for doing that.
Yeah, but I think it's conviction plus savviness plus smarts. And if you have that combination, most people who don't succeed and fall for whatever reason, at some point they are lacking one of those three buckets, and they're not growing what they need to grow in order to make up for the areas they're lacking in. So I don't know, there's always like this fun thought experiment you can do, which is at some point, if we all had that conviction level that Elon Musk has, and if we have that savviness and the smarts, are we eventually going to be able to drive whatever we're doing to success, even if at the start of it, that thing should have never been successful?
That's a good question. Because I know you spend a lot of time in the startup world, and a common early stage question when looking at a concept is is this actually necessary? Does anyone actually want this?
Yeah. I mean, customer discovery is, you drill customer discovery into people of making sure that you're not just iterating on a random technology or random idea that's never going to be of any value to anyone. But I do think that there's an element of customer discovery that's not necessarily a positive thing. For example, Steve Jobs used to always say, if you do a focus group, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of little elements from a whole bunch of people and add them all together. And what do you have? A shitty product. You don't have the iPhone, for example. So, customer discovery, I think, is important, but there's always these layers or these lenses. You got to look at these general tenets of being an entrepreneur and put your own spin on them to make sure you're moving forward.
It's funny you bring up Steve Jobs, because he also had something along the lines of the customer's not always right because they don't always know what they need yet. Like, I haven't created it, so how are they going to know they want this?
Yeah, that was another one of his sayings. It's interesting. I think a lot of people who are successful on an entrepreneurial venture, they get there not necessarily, or basically none of them probably get there in the most direct route. And so that's another thing with this whole thing of having conviction and being savvy and being smart, is you may be going down the wrong path, but if you maintain those three things and you keep iterating, you will eventually find your way, at least the theory is, you will eventually find your way to the right path.
Yeah, and I think an element of that is compounding, because some of those skills are going to be transferable regardless of what industry you're in, whether that's work ethic, relationships, etc. I've done so many podcasts with entrepreneurs who it's like they started off doing something so random before they finally did the big thing that's what everyone knows them for now.
Or so wrong. That's the other thing. You hear some of these people, the way they start out, and you're like, oh my God, how did you ever go from that to making it any element of success? But in their mind at that time, sitting down and thinking through how to figure it out perfectly was never going to get them to their desired end result. And they decided, it's all a cost-benefit analysis, and they decided that at that time, the cost of continuing to do more and more and more research wasn't worth the benefit. So instead, they just got started.
And they're action-oriented too.
Yeah.
Like, some people will ideate on something and do customer discovery and think about it for years, literal years. And it's always, oh, I'm about to launch and about to do it, whatever. But then the person who started with the shitty idea and did it for a month, 2 months, a year, whatever, and then moved on to the next thing, they've already tried 3 different things, and they're 10 steps ahead of you before you've actually launched your idea.
Yeah. So I think now, obviously, it's easy to say to do that in something where your entry cost is low and you don't go bankrupt, or you have money to still put food on the table. So I think it's all, again, a matter of where you're at in your situation and what lens you're looking at it. But I do think being action-oriented in general in life tends to be more, you tend to be more successful than being too analysis-driven.
Yeah. One of the most interesting guests I've had on the podcast was Ryan Smith whenever I was down in Orlando.
So it wasn't me.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
And nothing personal. And you just don't have the same story that he has.
Not yet. I don't know what his story is.
Well, but you're on the arc. You'll have the story one day.
Okay.
Anyway, so Ryan Smith, he had a stated goal of going bankrupt by 30 years old because he had figured out that if he took enough action in that 20, 30 year time frame of his life, that period, that he could recover from bankruptcy because of, I don't know, is it 7 or 10 years he can't buy a house and whatever. Like the actual, he looked at the consequences of bankruptcy and what does that mean? And then where would that put me in life if I did hit that? And he said the amount of risk that I would take on to incur bankruptcy, the upside would be absurd. The downside's actually kind of minimized because of how young I am. I have so much time to recover from it. So he had that stated goal and literally was like, how much can I do to hit bankruptcy by 30? And he looked at me, he smiled, and he goes, you know, that's one of the only goals I haven't hit. I didn't go bankrupt.
Fine. Yeah.
And now he's running like an $800 million firm now.
I'm hoping that I'm not on the path to bankruptcy. That's to circle back around where we started there. I hope I'm not on that path. I don't think that I'm on the path towards bankruptcy. But what's interesting though is, so you say that's his stated goal for him as an individual, and see how it turns out for him. He's action oriented, ends up being successful, but he wasn't trying to achieve that goal through a stupid approach. And I think that's where you go back to a lot of these maxims. You got to understand the underlying context behind them before you just start throwing them around like crazy. So I can sit here and say customer discovery is not important, because if you do too much customer discovery, you end up with a bad product, because like a focus group, you end up with all this mismatch of elements. But at the same time, some people need to do customer discovery because they don't have that intuitive element of being able to look and see, is there someone who is going to find this relevant in some way, shape, or form? So it's just interesting to me that the maxim has to also be looked at from the context of who is saying it or what perspective they come from.
Yeah, 100%. That brings me back to the last letter that John D. Rockefeller wrote to his son, John Jr., right before he died. John Rockefeller was 96 years old. He'd written these 38 letters to his son. And he says at the bottom of the letter, he says, John, you can forget everything else I've written. Everything comes down to this one sentence: plan boldly and implement carefully. It says we're talking about being action-oriented, but you're also saying don't be hasty about it. It's like there's John D. Rockefeller, arguably one of the greatest entrepreneurs in the entire world, telling you to be hyper-ambitious, but also be meticulous in your planning and implementation.
Yeah. It's similar to President Eisenhower had a saying one time that, I'm going to get the saying wrong, but in essence, his thing was like, we take all this time to make all these well thought out plans, even though we know we're going to throw them all away and not follow them at all, because it's that process that is of value for us in order to then achieve the outcome.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, good little riff there, Bob.
Yeah, we went through quite a few different individuals.
Which is funny because this is what a lot of our phone calls look like, is there's no context. It's usually, sometimes they're not even high sometimes. Usually it's just you call me.
There's rarely a buy. It's just a hang up.
the amount of times you've called me and you're just like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. And that's just the start of the conversation.
Well, that's a perpetual debate I have in my mind as to which one of them I think is better. Although I do think it's not fair because obviously one is deceased and the other one is still alive.
Right.
But I feel like, to an element, Elon Musk, I think, intrigues me more than Steve Jobs. But part of that is just because Elon Musk is still alive and doing action-oriented things, whereas Steve Jobs is deceased and therefore not doing action-oriented things right now. So, but I do find it interesting that Walter Isaacson wrote a book on both of them. He has, both of the books are very thick, and I've read both of them, and they're very good. I don't know, have you read the Walter Isaacson books on them?
Steve Jobs, yes. The one on Elon Musk, not yet.
Okay. It's good. It's interesting. It makes you realize that it is the journey of that man's life that has created how he reacts and how he acts now.
Yeah.
And, he's not perfect. He does a lot of things that you look at and say, why are you doing that? Why are you saying that? But it's also just fascinating to me that at the level he's at the amount of wealth that he has, he still wants to grind 16 to 20 hours a day. Like, that's insane to me. That shows the drive that this individual has. And so I think that, you know, there is a lot of good that can come out of it. But I think also then, you know, so I actually admire the drive that he has. But at the same time, I think I am so glad not everyone has that kind of drive.
Right.
Because if everyone had that kind of drive, we'd live in a really boring world, like very industrial driven only world. And I think there's a value to meritocracy and all of those elements, but I also think there's value to creativity. And so I think you need a mix of people who really want to constantly be driving forward, and you need a mix of people who are not quite as driven in that context, but maybe they're more social.
Elon Musk's relationship with money is something that is just fascinating, because it seems even now he's not afraid to lose all of his money. Like, just like when he sold PayPal, he made 200 million.
Yeah,
he made 200 million, and he split it up 100 million between SpaceX, 100 million between Tesla, and he wasn't afraid to drain the bank on either of them. He got very close.
And that's the same story. I mean, even go back a step before that, Zip2. Once he sold out of Zip2, and he made, I think, like $23 million, something like that. Don't quote me on the exact number, but he made an obscene amount of money for him at that time, especially considering that
he's like 22.
Basically came into the United States with very little money. He makes a lot of money. And what did he do? He parlayed it all into PayPal. And he put a lot of money into PayPal.
Yeah.
And, well, to be fair, he put a lot of money into X, which was a competitor of PayPal, working out of California, Silicon Valley, out of the same strip mall, which is beyond blowing my mind. And then eventually they coincide and they join forces, and Elon ends up being the CEO until eventually they decide to fire Elon because he's crazy. So basically he's put the most money in. He has a lot of equity in this company, not enough, obviously, to be able to maintain his status as the CEO. He gets pushed out. It ends up going on to be successful. What's interesting is the relationship that a lot of those people have with Elon now, who are part of the PayPal days when they
PayPal Mafia.
That's right. Well, but just, it's interesting. They pushed him out, and yet he still has a good relationship now. It took a lot of time, I'm sure, but he now has a relationship with him, which reminds me, this idea of time is another David Sinra quote where, like, time carries the weight.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, you can get really heated about things, really passionate about things. Then over time, I think you see perspective and you see these other elements, and then you eventually starts to dissipate some of the heat off of the situation, and you end up looking at things with more clarity.
It also carries the weight with effort. Like, you can't just, like, the compounding effect of effort requires time as an input to that for you to get the result that you want, which is often hard. But so back to your Elon Musk comment, I think it was like a year or two ago, he didn't have a primary home. Just still sleeping on people's couches, just flying to Austin and back to LA and just.
Yeah, I think he has a house in Texas in the SpaceX area.
Now he does, but like it was recently. He still didn't even, he just is committed so fully. He's found sleeping in the office.
Even now, I was reading an article either today or a couple of days ago where it says with this whole Doge thing, he's so fixated on it. He's sleeping at the government building again, focused and fixated on this thing, just like he did with Twitter, just like he did with Tesla and SpaceX. So clearly, when he decides to go all in, he goes all in.
He 100% named Doge Department of Government Efficiencies because of Dogecoin.
Oh yeah, I think that's very clear.
He's so quirky. Like, he's so quirky.
Well, yeah, I mean the whole way that his cars and Tesla spell sex, except it's the Model 3 instead of the Model E, because I think it was Ford that owned the trademark on the Model E, and they tried to buy it off of him, and it became too steep of a price, so it became Model 3. So yeah, he does a lot of weird things, like, and that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, as it probably should for a lot of people. But it's just interesting to me that yet he continues. For him, it doesn't stop his drive. Like, all that noise, all the, like, that's his way of playing a game, of having fun, but yet he continues to drive towards the outcome of what he's trying to achieve.
As we look at the dichotomy between Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, one thing I'm curious about your thoughts on that I find interesting is that Elon Musk religiously talks about first principles. He's very science-based in how he operates everything, break it down to first principles and then build from there. Steve Jobs was very spiritual. He did very quirky things. He did acid. He
Didn't he stand in a toilet with no socks on?
He would commonly stand in a toilet with no socks on. He took a sabbatical out to like the Middle East or something to find himself back in his Atari days, like very spiritual compared to Elon Musk, very first principles, not very religious at all. And it's interesting to see both of them be so hyper successful, but Steve Jobs being so creative in that domain and being very led by like a higher spirit or whatever, but then Elon being so science and first principles.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, Rachel and I were talking earlier today about there's two ways to rationalize everything. And you hear a lot of people rationalize everything with spiritualism. Mm-hmm. It happened because it was meant to be. That you'll hear that saying a lot. It was meant to be so that it happened. And to me, all that person is doing is they're trying to rationalize through spiritualism. They want to have a reason why it occurred. Therefore, it happened because it was meant to be. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, but yet still rationalization is rationalization through logic, where everything you're doing, you're trying to rationalize through a very logical, methodical approach. And that's kind of like Elon's first principles. But then, you can't put these two things on a continuum, because then unless in the middle of the continuum is complete irrational and chaos. And then so it's kind of interesting. You can go from rationalization through spiritualism to complete irrational chaos to rationalization through pure logic. And so it's just a weird continuum to think about. I don't actually know where I'm going with that, other than that it just seems there's something about that that's odd to me, that two people can try to they feel the need to rationalize it because their mind will not accept irrational or chaos. And so they decide to rationalize it. But then one will rationalize it through God or spiritualism, and the other one rationalizes it purely through logic. And they end up coming to two very different outcomes or pathways. I guess they come two different very pathways to come to the same outcome, which is pure rationalization.
To throw John D. Rockefeller in the mix, again, he felt religiously called to become the most powerful man in the world. And so all three of those, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Rockefeller, potentially boiled down to belief. Even Elon Musk with his first principles, he's doing the math in his head, and he's like, if I believe and trust in these laws, if this is how the world operates, then I can do X, Y, and Z. Whereas the spiritualism rationalization is, I believe in these outcomes, I feel this presence, whatever, etc. So I know that I can step forward and act in this manner, and that there's going to be some higher power taking care of this.
Yeah, there's definitely, okay, so that's interesting, because there's definitely something with belief, because they say when he decided that he wanted to catch the booster using the method which they caught the booster, that it was like Elon who kept saying, we're going to catch it in this way. And everyone else is looking at him like, you are batshit crazy, dude. That is not the way this works. Like, that is just not how this is going to work.
Right.
And so basically, he ended up saying, who in this room is willing to say that's how it's going to work? Person raises their hand. He goes, great, you're now in charge of this program. You and I are going to make this work.
Oh, I love that.
And it's almost like it became more of him proving his belief right. That became the new goal to some extent, versus just being able to catch the booster the way it did. Which, when that booster comes down and it catches it between, it is, I've watched it a few times. It is pretty amazing.
It's remarkable. It's truly remarkable.
It's one of these things, do you ever wonder, like, there's so many remarkable things in the world. We're not supposed to say unbelievable. I've learned that. Matthew McConaughey said that's the stupidest word in the English dictionary, because you better believe it just happened. So anyway, remarkableness, do you ever, like, there's so many things that are remarkable in the world. And it's amazing how when we see them over and over and over again, then they start to wear off.
Right.
As with anything, I guess, it's not new anymore. It's not novel. Therefore, it starts to wear off. Like, even when you step back and just think through things, it is amazing the amount of elements, the amount of things that we continue to figure out and continue to move forward. It just makes you wonder. I always go through this. This is another thought experiment I do, is way back when they were building the pyramids, for example, or even maybe before that, did they have a knowledge base in an area that was lost in the Great Library, for example, of Alexandria, that we've never recovered that capability of doing it? And before, like, when I was younger, I used to always say, no, of course, it was way back then, they were dumber than we are now. So of course we figured everything out back then. We continue to build upon it, maybe is a better way of saying that, rather than just calling them dumb.
It's the dumbest thing to assume that we are smarter now than we were back then.
But what's weird is, like, just kind of think about it, we were able to go to the moon with man with a lot less computing power than what you and I have in our cell phones.
Yeah.
And yet it seems like today we don't have the ability to go to the moon with a man anymore. And so that is what has turned my belief around. I do believe we can learn things and then lose that talent base, because when you're really starting to get into some of these niche areas of super smart things that require a lot of engineering or a lot of complexity built on top of it, you realize that the universe is not as big as if you were in just the general population, for example. And so there's only so many people capable of doing some of these things. And so it's a small universe, and sometimes those small universes stay small and nobody else gets interested in it, for example. Then those people get older and they keep getting older and older, and then they start dying off. And you can see how we can lose certain capabilities and technologies. I mean, I don't think it happens very often, but
Right.
I don't think it's no longer do I think it's insane to believe that there were things that the human race used to know or have a better skill set at doing than we do now. I don't think they were probably better at electronics than we are now, for example, but maybe they were better at certain types of engineering architecturally.
What sort of technology could we have lost in that time that they were better at that was the electronic version? Like,
well, I don't know. See that. That's just so crazy to think about, because we assume they didn't have electricity. We assume basically they didn't have electronics.
Right.
And so they didn't have those same skill sets that we have now that we continue to build on. But I guess it is possible that maybe they did have some elements of electronics that since went away.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like the technologies that they had that they mastered that we underutilized. Like, think about the wheel, dude.
Oh yeah,
Think about them inventing the wheel.
I think mechanically they were probably better from like maybe an architectural standpoint. They always say like even the pyramids today with the laser technology and everything else we have, it would have been hard to build them to the level of precision at which they built them.
Incredible. One of the common theories I see is
Are we going with aliens here? Or?
No, I was going to go with the pyramids. One of the common theories that I see is that they created some sort of blockade of water and then focused a channel, and then they would put the pyramid blocks into the water and then float them
and then set them and then.
But how do you get them out of the water and lift them?
No, I think they floated them up to where they were,
and then you drain the water out. Yeah, that's interesting.
Now there used to be a time, for a while, maybe this won't surprise you. For a while, I got really fixated on the Great Pyramid of Giza. Like I was in school still, like high school, I think, maybe even grade school, and so I bought all these old books on it and started reading them. But it's well known, well documented that they used to be encased in marble. Like the entire outside of it was encased in marble.
Serious?
Yeah. And so eventually, when the rest of civilization around there had a use for the marble, for example, they would then start going and raiding it from it. And so no longer are they encased in marble, but they used to be purely encased in marble. That would have been amazing to see.
And what happened to the marble?
It got pillaged.
Oh, nice.
Over time.
That's crazy though. That amount of marble.
Yeah, it's would be remarkable to see, but not unbelievable.
But to go back to your point of like the mechanics and the architecture of like maybe some that was lost, I saw a video last night of a self-supported bridge. I don't remember the inventor, the architect, but it was like a pretty long time ago when they just started building bridges, and it was how you can build a bridge without having any support coming up from the water. So they were doing it with
I think they called it a suspension bridge.
Maybe I don't know. It's with toothpicks though. And so you can set up two, and then you set like one in the middle, and then you get another one, and you can do this backside, and you bring it up. And then there's nothing actually like every piece is dependent upon the previous piece. When you put the whole thing together, you can build the bridge out of it.
Oh, because of the way the loads get distributed. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Like, it makes sense.
How are you doing structural analysis in the 1800s or whatever that was when they built that? Like,
that's still one of the things, not to go back to Walter Isaacson. He has this book on Einstein. My goal, as you may have realized by now, is to own and read every Walter Isaacson book, which I have not done, although I just bought the one on Henry Kissinger.
Ooh.
And by bought, I mean it was given to me as a gift from my mother-in-law.
Oh,
in case she's listening.
Shout out, Connie.
Cinnamon rolls. But yeah, she makes great cinnamon rolls.
She makes such good cinnamon rolls.
So anyway, Walter Isaacson's book on Einstein, you think through like how he came up with some of the like theories of relativity that he came up with and the math that he was doing. Like, even now, knowing what he did and how he did it, and then going through the proofs, that's a really hard thing to do when you have the pathway in front of you.
Right.
Imagine doing it when you don't have the pathway in front of you. It's one of those things that I don't know it really confuses me when I always think about the ability for mathematicians or physicists or theorists to come up with these things without any pathway in front of them.
I was just thinking about that the other day. Like when I was in geometry class, I hated proofs. Like I hated going through and like proving the logic behind it. But as I think about it, I was pulling from a bank. Like I knew the 7 or 8 proofs that we were tested over. And so I knew I could pick one of those and then like, okay, it's this one. I can do the math, whatever. But to be the person where there's nothing written down.
Correct.
It's literally you sitting there and looking at something and saying, what are the ways this could happen? And what are the laws that would allow this to take place?
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's crazy.
And to think that a human being or multiple human beings were able to do that without the pathway in front of them is this a remarkable thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this might be a little bit, I feel like this is directly related. At least this is in my head. I don't know if I'll articulate it properly. Like the last year, I have been obsessed with the idea of compound interest because you can prove it with money.
Yep.
But like with people, I feel like I don't know. I don't see many people with the same infatuation I do with this. Like your daily habits, the things you're doing, whether that's in work, whether it's in your relationship, whether that's like physically in the gym. I just feel like I can visibly see everything compounding. And so to me, it's like a proof almost. It's like I can't write down any sort of number that says that necessarily this compounding is occurring unless I hit some sort of big milestone. It's like I made X amount of dollars or whatever the situation is. But like on a day-to-day basis, I'm often thinking about every single thing that you do and how that would compound if you allowed enough time for that to happen.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I think you're right. A lot of people don't think about it, and to some extent, that's why a lot of people, when they're not doing work or school or whatever, hanging out with their family, they default to, I'll watch TV.
Yeah,
I'll do something that, unless you're going to become somebody like a filmmaker or you're going to become a script writer, watching a whole lot of television isn't going to get you that compound interest, really,
right.
Unless they're all nonfiction documentary type movies. And even then, it's not going to, at some point, there's a diminishing value. So I do think that to a lot of people, they don't see the value of compounding, especially when you take it out of the context of like money, where it's easy to see, easy to run some formulas and be able to determine, oh, if I save this and it's this interest and it keeps gaining on top of each other, then it starts this, as Warren Buffett would say, the snowball. It starts this snowball going and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, that is what compounding is, right? Is this idea of you start small and you get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I do think it's interesting because if you keep that mindset, like I know for me, for example, when I go somewhere on like a work trip, for example, I used to always be the person that would download my movies ahead of time and just completely veg out on the movie. On the plane ride, I would just completely veg out on a movie. And while I don't think that's bad to do that from time to time, what I've realized is, man, I have so many things that I actually want to accomplish in my life. There's so many things I want to do, so many books I want to read, so many areas that I want to master or understand better. The reality is I'm not going to be able to do all of what I want to do or all that I feel like I want to do. And so when I put into that perspective, what I've started to realize is it's a lot better that when I have some free time, that I leverage that in a way that I can get some compounding benefit off of it. Now, I don't do everything in the most efficient manner possible. And I don't remember, I think it was on a recent Modern Wisdom episode with, I think it was the one with Adam Grant, where they talk about intentional de-optimization.
Right. Allowing yourself to reset and recharge.
Correct. Allowing yourself to intentionally do something or have an area in your life. It was with credit cards, is what that individual brought up. Like we could all figure out how to optimize our credit card usage and know when to swipe this card versus that card based on the rewards and based on what place I'm at. And I get 3% here, 2% there. But the benefit you get is of limited benefit, and it takes that time and that toll on you to figure it out. So you just say in that area of your life, I'm going to deliberately de-optimize, and I don't care if I'm not getting the best deal.
Right. So you can sacrifice decision fatigue, the same reason that Steve Jobs wore the same black turtleneck was so that he could spend more time making more important decisions.
Yeah. You wonder how that started. Like I realized the reason he did it, but why did he choose a black turtleneck? I've always wondered why he didn't choose like a different, just a different shirt altogether. Because turtlenecks, I can honestly say, I don't know if I've ever worn a turtleneck in my life. So it's just an odd decision, I feel like. Especially for someone who used to put their feet in toilets, to use a black turtleneck seems a little to be honest, it seems uppity to me.
A little bit higher class than
correct.
the toilet plunging.
I expect him to be wearing like just a white beater or something like that, walking around.
Can you imagine presenting the iPhone looking like white trash?
Well, I'm not saying necessarily white trash. I'm just saying, like, in general, I expect him to not quite be the black turtleneck. But anyway, maybe that was that evolution. He went from being Steve Jobs 1.0 when he ran Apple the first time to creating this thing called Next that really wasn't much of anything. But ultimately,
the operating system.
Well, I mean, that's what Apple supposedly bought back when they got him with Next. But in reality, they were paying for Steve Jobs. I would love to actually know if that Next operating system really, truly did go into the Apple computers the way they that's the way the story is spun for sure. But I'm not sure that I completely buy that. Maybe there's some papers out there at some point that will be declassified that will give us that information.
Is that going to be before or after the JFK files?
I don't know. I also went through a JFK phase. So I went through Pyramids of Giza, JFK phase.
Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, I haven't gone through too hard of an Elon Musk phase. Like, I find him fascinating and I read his books and all that, or books about him. But so I do find the JFK files very interesting. There's a book that I have, The Kennedy Half Century. It's a rather thick book that I've read. And it had a lot of the different theories, from the Zapruder film to one of the police officers had left their walkie-talkies on, and supposedly you could hear the way something echoed off of it, and you could find out if there was 2 shooters or 3 shooters.
Yeah.
So what's going to be really disappointing, though, is when they release these JFK files, the entirety of the JFK files, and they basically don't have anything.
Everything's blacked out, yeah.
Or everything's blacked out. But until it happens, there is an amount of excitement for me, I would say, to figure out, is any of these so-called conspiracy theories true?
Yeah.
Because I think truth is another weird thing for me, because I do believe...
Oh, I was just going to bring this up. Go.
Okay, so I do believe in... I believe in an absolute... That's hard to say. I think I believe in an absolute truth. Like, there is some element of an absolute truth. But I don't know that I believe entirely in an absolute truth. Like, there's got to be a gray zone around every area of truth. And we talk about, like, you know, obviously as human beings, we all have senses, and we only have so many senses, right? Like smell, touch, sight, all of those elements. So we have these senses, and that's how it is through those lens that we are able to perceive something to define the truth that we expect to be.
It's subjective.
Yeah. But in reality, no, the lens is subjective, and therefore, is there really truly any objective truth?
Right.
I don't know. But yet, the first person who says there's no objective truth, get a car on one end and get it running at you and just stand there and let it hit you, and you're going to find out truth really does exist pretty damn quick, because it's going to hit you and it's going to hurt, if not kill you. So there is clearly an objective truth of some element. I think it's on like this... this is why there's macro and microeconomics. I think it's like on this macro scale, there is objective truth. But then when you get onto the micro scale on these things, I think it all becomes a hell of a lot more subjective.
Well, does zero actually exist?
There's a whole book on that by Jim Holt that I actually own as well. Yeah. I did not go down that rabbit hole as bad. I only read the one book on it. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, does nothingness exist? That's a very big question.
It is. These are deep questions. So I was going to bring up truth in the context of, we talked about the proofs, and it's almost like these laws for geometry and how that works.
Yep.
My recent infatuation has been with, like, what are the potential laws of, like, the universe? So I talked about compound interest. I've been infatuated with that because I'm fully convinced that exists, and that's a real thing that you can operate by, even though it's, again, maybe non-tangible in a lot of senses. And then the other one that I've become infatuated with is the truth, because you build mental models around truth. And so this idea of objective versus subjective and absolute, like, you can apply that to a whole lot of different domains. But if you build the wrong mental model, your own operating system, your own perception of the world on 100 variations of the truth that are slightly off from the actual absolute truth, then you're operating in a world that doesn't actually exist. So then when bad things happen or consequences occur that you didn't anticipate, it's because your mental model was built incorrectly based off of incomplete information or inaccurate truth.
Yeah, I mean, I semi-follow what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I just... when you get into these level of questions, it is honestly, so not to say that you or I or Einstein or Newton or anybody like
You're
that.
putting us in the same categories?
I'm not putting us in the same category, but I am saying like a lot of when you see these scientific advances, it starts out as pure philosophy theory.
Yeah.
Based on an underlying scientific knowledge that then advances it further and further until you can prove it out time and time and time again, then making it less of a philosophical thing and then more of an actual scientific nature.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting. The relationship, I think too often in a world where we love to be STEM focused, too often we realize that there is a philosophical element or nature that is involved in all of this, especially if you want to advance or push STEM. So if all you want to do is play in STEM, just do the routine task that someone else has already developed, you probably don't need the philosophical element at all. You can just, you're just running routines, you're running algorithms, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't mean it's easy. It can be very, very hard and very complex, but it's when you're trying to push the boundaries that I think the philosophical element has to come in, because that's what gives you this element of creativity to start, pushing or blowing up the balloon a little bit more, pushing the boundaries out. So I do think it is interesting when you get into these highly large questions, these deep, complex, philosophical, scientific questions. I don't think there's a right answer. And I think the more you explore them, the more you realize that is the mental, Jedi mind trick that you do on yourself, which is the more you explore them, the more you think you know until suddenly you realize, oh my God, I don't know anything.
Right.
And then you devolve into this land of chaos. And yet you've always viewed yourself as a very logical, thought-driven person. And now I'm in this land of chaos.
And nihilism.
Yeah, it could literally drive you nuts if you let it. So you've always got to somehow bring yourself. Maybe that's why Steve Jobs put his feet in water,
He grounded himself.
To ground himself. Isn't that what a lot of people do? They go in grass.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start trying to do that.
There you go. Well, the thing that is interesting with the philosophical belief is the way you think about things has an effect on the world is kind of like another way of phrasing your philosophy. And that's not necessarily science-based, but there's more research coming out now about voluntarily doing difficult things, like the mindset of, I know this is hard, so I'm going to choose to do it, rather than something negative happening and you don't want to face that adversity. They're actually seeing grit is the concept, is the measurement unit, but they're actually seeing really cool research done on grit. And if you take a look at, I think it's the prefrontal cortex, it's some area of the brain, you can actually measure the brain activity of voluntary discomfort. Like if you're going to take an ice bath and you say, I'm choosing to take this, I don't want to take it, but I'm going to force myself to do it. You can see that area of the brain activate, and then over time you can see it grow compared to if you got dropped in an ice bath by a friend or something, you're upset about it. You can actually see the effect of that on the brain, and then you can tie that to outcomes. And if you measure the person over the period of their life and the outcomes that they have tied to it, it's a growth mindset versus a closed mindset. And a lot of that you couldn't tie anything to it. There was no brain research on it, but now you can, and it's super interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that is interesting. I will say also that since we don't see each other on a daily basis anymore, my ice baths per day have dramatically decreased.
I also took the ice bath from your house, so that's
true.
Probably hurt you a little bit. And you moved. Yeah.
That may not have hurt me any on that. But yes, that's another thing I did in my life. I moved.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
You need to go to Sweat House sometime. We need to go to Sweat House. That'd be really fun.
I don't know what Sweat House is.
Are you serious?
It's got to be a franchise, right?
Yeah, Contrast Therapy. It's in Bradley Fair.
Okay.
So Friday mornings, 4 Mile Friday is what it's called. We run 4 miles at 6 a.m.
Who is this we? I've heard about this.
This is a collective we. This is myself. It's Hunter Mitchum, which owns Sweat House.
Okay.
And then whoever else wants to come out and run.
So is we really just the two of you, or there are also typically more people?
There's typically more.
Okay.
Now, I will say when it was snowing and cold out,
it was just the two of you?
It was just the two of us.
But that shows grit that you went out there when it was one of those snowy, icy days when you could have fallen and broken a hip.
We did fall, yeah.
Okay.
Anyways.
Proving my theory.
But after that, we go into Sweat House and we do contrast therapy, ice bath, and sauna back and forth. And it is a blast.
So I've never done contrast therapy. But I will say I did floating for a while.
Like on Epsom salt?
Yeah, like
really?
In a float spa. That's when I lived in St. Louis.
Seriously?
I used to go to
was it a deprivation tank?
Yeah, sensory deprivation tank. And it was very interesting. I did it for a few times. It's kind of one of these things that I wish I still did. So maybe I think there are a few in Wichita here I could go to. So
yeah,
I'll never forget though, the first time you go into one, you don't realize you have a cut somewhere on yourself and you lay in that salt water, and your senses are not deprived at that moment because it hurts like hell, but eventually this thing goes away. But it is an interesting thing where you sit in that tank and you maybe have a little bit of soft music playing, but you're just sitting in water that is the exact same temperature as your body. You're not really sitting in it because the water has all this salt that's hyper dissolved into it. So you're floating on this water and just literally floating in thin air. And if you allow your mind, the first time I did it, I couldn't get myself there. But the second or third time I did it, I was able to get myself there. You literally do feel like you're just floating in space in essence.
Was it dark in it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's sweet.
Lights are off. There's a way you can put on lights, because for some reason as humans, we think that laying in this water then touching our eyes might have a positive effect. It does not have a positive effect. It hurts really bad. So I think that's why they have the light system you can turn on so you can wipe your eye.
I've always wanted to do a sensory deprivation tank.
Yeah, it's cool.
So what was that experience like for you?
Well, I think it is a way, some people may not know this about me, but my mind tends to race quite a bit. I tend to think quite a bit. And so for me, I went to try to say, can I just literally shut off my mind and lay? So I think some people use it as a way of going through a thought process. For me, I was trying to use it as a way of turning off all thought process. And like I said, the first time I couldn't really get there, but I think the second or third time I did. And then what's weird is then your time is up, and then you get out and then you take a shower, like a warm shower afterwards. And like that water starts hitting your body everywhere. And it feels like you take a shower in the morning, you don't literally feel like you can observe where every jet stream is hitting your body. But after a sensory deprivation tank, you feel like you can feel literally where every single jet stream is hitting your body.
That's so cool.
So it's weird. It's a different feeling. And then, a lot of people, Steve Jobs would have fit in well here in this spiritualist world, because then you go out and they're like sitting on the couch and drinking tea. Whereas me, I was like putting on my clothes and getting the hell out of there.
You're under the patent office.
Correct. I got to go back and do work now. So anyway, it was an interesting experience. Yeah.
I need to do that sometime.
I think it would be a good experience for you, especially since you do all the biohacking, the life hacking, I'm going to take ice baths to constrict my pores or whatever you're doing those things. I don't actually know if it's for skincare purposes, but I've assumed that now.
It's for inflammation.
Oh, okay. So, and then you do the contrast therapy where you do saunas a lot.
Yeah.
So you don't do steam rooms though. I mean,
I don't like steam rooms. I don't feel like I can breathe in there. The air is so thick.
Yeah, there's a lot of steam in there.
Yeah. I did one with Bryce Lobb 2 years ago, and I hated it. I felt very uncomfortable in there.
Yeah, I don't know. I like the sauna better, personally. I like that dry heat more.
When are you going to sauna at your house?
I don't know.
Rachel's been asking for one.
I don't know if she's been asking for one. We have a lot of changes coming to our house soon, with a new child coming along very shortly. So I think we'll start with a new child, and then maybe a few years down the road, we'll get a sauna.
Hear me out, though. You'll want a sauna and ice bath at the house, because with that child, you're not going to want to leave as much, and you're still going to need to take care of yourself mentally and decompress and reset. The quickest way you could possibly do that is just hopping in the sauna and the ice bath.
Well, we don't live very far. Now, it is the Northwest Y with the sauna that I don't really particularly like, but we don't live that far from there. I think we can go there to decompress.
Right, but when it's 4 a.m. and your child's screaming and you just finally get to fall back asleep, and you're like, oh my gosh, I need something. Just hop in the ice bath.
If I remember when Lincoln was a little guy, when it was 4 a.m. and we finally got him back to sleep, your immediate reaction was, I got to run into bed and lay down as quickly as possible to get as much shut-eye as I can.
You see, I disagree with that parenting philosophy. I think the ice bath could improve your energy levels.
I don't know. So circling back on truth, though, because I did have an element of this I wanted to bring up, and then I didn't get a chance to bring up because you brought it somewhere weird. So let me go back.
Ouch.
Let me go back to truth. Dr. Becky Kennedy is someone she's a child. I think she's a child therapist or child psychologist, but she gives like a parenting advice. And I read one of her books, her book called Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. And the interesting thing is, the one thing that struck me out of that book that I swear she gives you in the context of trying to make you a better parent. And I think I've used it in my parenting style, and I feel like I've gotten better at certain things because of it. But honestly, this line has affected me more just in my general life is, you can hold two truths at the same time that are not compatible with each other. And that's where this whole notion of like two truths can be true. So you can be feeling one way and this other thing may also be true. And they may seem like they can't jive with each other, but two truths can be true at the same time. So I do think that's an interesting thing about truth is that's what makes me question this whole idea of, is there an objective truth? And I think, again, at the macro level, there has to be. But
so the two different things being true at the same time, is that perception versus reality?
Well, I think I don't think it's perception versus reality necessarily. I think what she's trying to point out is both people, if there's multiple people in the interaction, you're approaching reality through two different. So maybe it is perception versus reality. You approach reality through two different lenses because you're two different humans that are in two different positions in your life. And therefore, what is true for one of you may not be true for the other one, but what is true for me may not be true for them. But yet those two truths can both be true at the same time.
Like if assuming there's like a spouse or something, and the spouse gives you a piece of harsh criticism. And
that happens a lot for me.
And you say, well, that's just mean and unnecessary. And they say, well, actually, this is true, and it may be harsh, but it is necessary for you to know this.
Yeah.
Is that two truths being, is that?
I think potentially, yeah. I think that's, yes.
Or what would fit like a better example?
Well, the idea of, so going back to the context of the book for parenting, the idea of a child suddenly throwing a huge temper tantrum in the middle of a grocery store because they really want to buy something. Mm-hmm. So, to some extent, the child may really want to buy that and have the feelings and be willing to be. It is true that you need to allow the child to learn how to express their feelings. So that's a truth that's occurring there. But at the same time, it's true that you are also in a grocery store and your child is flailing up and down and causing disruption for other people.
You need to socialize them.
Correct. Well, I don't know about that, but yes, I guess that's right. You need to socialize them and make sure they understand social norms.
Right.
But so two truths, two different things can be true at the same time, and they may not necessarily be compatible. That the child may be feeling that way and wanting to express and have the right to express it. So that could be one truth, but then at the same time, you should have the right to discipline the child as is necessary. So I think what I'm trying to get at is there is two different perceptions, that two different lenses, even though we're both looking at the same thing. So I'm looking at it in one way and you're looking at it another way. And both of us could be right, but yet seem incompatible.
So like, yeah, I'm getting it now. Whenever you made the comment that where I took my conversation on truth was weird, to you, it may have been weird, but to me, it made a lot of sense and added up. Both of those could be true.
I guess. This is really devolved. So is there any other major topics you want to discuss on this
I feel like we actually nailed a lot, dude. We started off with Rockefeller, got us moving.
You went hard on Rockefeller.
Dude, Rockefeller right now is so good. He's so good.
Well, he's deceased, kind of like Steve Jobs is also deceased. So he's not doing anything new. I think it's just that you're learning and exploring him more.
His story is just so good, though.
Well, I think also David Senra does such an amazing job of bringing these people to us and making us realize the importance of assessing these historical figures to understand what we can learn from them and get and do better than them.
He like brings them back alive. Like you feel his excitement through them.
I guess maybe not do better than them, but what we can learn from them and how we can evolve in our own ways. But what's always interesting to me is you hear David Senra talk about all these different historical figures and the drive they might have and how much passion they have and how many hours they worked. But yet he will always say, I have 2 kids and I want to be a great parent. And I didn't have the best parent role models in my life. So it is interesting. You can't be perfect at everything. And I think that is something that we over the last 5-6 years, it seems like we in America have gotten to this point where everyone has to be perfect at all times, but that's just an unrealistic perception of who we are as humans. We are flawed humans. Every human is flawed. So we may be very, very good in one area, but that means we're probably not as good in another area. And it's just the way it is.
What do you say the last 5 to 6 years?
It just seems like part of it is as I get older, I'm more perceptive of these things. But That's it true. Seems like in the last 5 to 6 years, when someone does something wrong, we immediately jump down their throats and say, throw out every good thing they may have possibly done. Let's take the one bad thing they did and let's highlight it and focus on it. And that's all we focus on from now until eternity. That's clearly not the way we should assess people. That doesn't mean we should condone an activity when it's a bad choice of an activity, but it does mean that you should always realize that person is a human just like you're a human. And just because they're a more public figure human than you are, doesn't mean that they are always going to be perfect or on. Because if they are always perfect or on, I promise you what that means is you're not actually seeing the true human being.
Yeah, you should probably trust them a little bit less.
Yeah, because they're just playing a character. They're playing a role throughout their entire life, and they're not being authentic. And that's why I think authenticity, it's interesting. As we move into an era, I mean, we've been moving into this era, but now we're getting really close, right? Started probably around in 2010 as the internet started to explode and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Data became more and more and more prevalent. Now you add all of this data, and you add on top of it technology like AI, which is able to use the data to generate more and more and more content. So that no longer is lack of information a thing. Right. Anybody can get any amount of information by just taking the time to get on the internet and learn. And no longer is content generation going to be the key thing, like just rote content generation, because now we have AI, ChatGPT. We can all go on there. I mean, we all know anybody who has been on LinkedIn since ChatGPT became prevalent realizes that damn near every post you read now is clearly directly off of ChatGPT. Yep. And for the first 3 reads, it was cool. And then it was like, oh my God, every one of them sound the same. Yep. They're not authentic. They lack authenticity. And so I think we're entering into this era where authenticity, at least this is my hope, authenticity is going to become more important. And so people are going to reward authenticity more. But there's got to be this balancing of that, because that doesn't mean you get to be an asshole to everyone and say, I'm being an authentic asshole.
Right.
It's not the way it works out. So I just think that we're moving into this element that you're going to have to be, if you can learn to be authentic and empathetic at the same time, I think you're going to be on a really good path for how we're going to continue to evolve as social creatures over the next 5-6 years while we try to figure out this whole AI thing.
I agree with you. And I think we're seeing that pendulum swing, especially in the media. Like podcasts are becoming huge right now.
Yes.
Like indifferent of who you voted for, arguably the largest media appearance of the entire election was a Joe Rogan episode of a podcast.
I mean, this may have been the famous, it was the famous Nixon JFK televised debate, which was the first debate that was where television kind of decided the presidential election. Mm-hmm. Now, how true is that? I don't know. But historically, that's what it's kind of always been pinned as. Well, at some point, we had a internet-based election, potentially. I don't know if that actually fully happened. But this time around, we had a different medium of media than what we had previously had, and it was podcasts. And one candidate was all over the place on podcasts, and the other candidate wasn't everywhere on podcasts. And I don't know if that was a strategic decision. I don't know the rationale for it. And look, it could have backfired really bad for the candidate that was all over on podcasts if the theory of podcasts will actually garner more votes would have been wrong.
Right.
But considering that I believe Donald Trump won the youth vote or the younger population vote by more than previous Republican presidential candidates, kind of shows that he somehow struck a chord. And my guess is it's because he was able to get himself in front of these individuals on these podcasts a lot more easily.
Yeah, and one step further, the podcast was so valuable opposed to mainstream media because the host of the episode, you could trust their authenticity.
Correct.
Because of the backlog of what they've said before, what they've done before.
Yeah.
And so you could expect a more open and raw conversation.
That's right. And it was that authentic nature of it is what helped drive the interest in it. Mm-hmm. Even if there are people who probably listened to a lot of those podcasts who did not vote for Donald Trump, but saw a different lens or a different perspective because it was more of an authentic conversation than a taped television interview where next thing you know, it's all cut up in different segments for commercial purposes or for promo purposes. So it is interesting how authenticity is going to start to continue to be an important thing. I don't remember, I heard it on a podcast somewhere where if you're reading a post, if you're reading something that you think is AI generated, so you don't actually know if it is or isn't, but your brain just thinks it's AI generated, like somewhere out there, there's studies that basically show that you immediately shut it off.
Right.
Like you don't care about it. You don't. Right. So that's why I'm very fascinated by so AI, right? AI is going to become the new big thing. So now we can do AI generated commercials for shoes or for whatever, for clothing that doesn't actually have any real human being in it. But if my brain, when they see something and knows it's AI generated or thinks it's AI generated, starts to shut it off, I feel like those commercials are going to bomb because you're immediately going to say, it's just a computer made that. It's not a human that made that.
Well, Instagram's already seeing that. Like if you scroll on Reels on Instagram, it used to be you'd see one sponsored Reel. And so it's a video that plays after another video. And then people start picking up because in the bottom left corner, they're required to say sponsored and it's like an ad and whatever. They started picking up that it's like, oh, sponsored. And they'd immediately swipe. And Meta has the amount of time that you spend like consuming that advertisement or whatever else compared to the other media you're consuming within the app. So if I spend 10 seconds watching a reel, I scroll to the next one and I immediately see sponsor and it's 1 second, they can see that data point. So what they started to do is they take the pattern of that and now they've made it a more variable pattern where you'll watch a couple and then it'll be a sponsored and the next one will be a sponsored, but you're not used to being a sponsored after sponsored. So you spend more time on it. And then you'll watch one and there'll be another one that'll pop up and they've changed the pattern because humans have started to do exactly what you're saying of not liking the sponsored content.
Yeah. And don't you think, so you and I are not, teenagers anymore. So
don't put us in the same age group.
I realize you're slightly younger than me.
Slightly, it's 10 years. It's over 10 years.
So anyway, by being slightly younger than me, I realize that means you're not as old as me. So, but it is interesting. As you grow up with these technologies, like even you or I, we realize, oh, it says sponsored. Or you and I, when we Google something, we always skip over all of the AdWord crap.
Oh my gosh.
But then if you watch your parents do it, they don't. They click on every one of those and you just want to like grab them and shake them because you're like, damn it, quit doing that. Because A, that just gave more money to Google. But why would you do that? Like scroll past the sponsored things.
They're breaking like a social contract.
Exactly. And it's getting worse now. Like you go to Amazon, the whole first page of Amazon are not true authentically based on what you search.
Right.
So I think what will be interesting to see is the value of how some of this AI generated content or these keywords, for example, the value of them is really probably more for that older crowd where you can like quote unquote trick them into it. You can fish them, if you will. It's almost like a phishing scam is what these sponsored and these other AdWords and all that is. It's like a phishing scam. And, I like to believe that when I get an email that's supposedly from my boss saying they need to call me, I need to call them immediately so I can buy them some gift cards. Like my antenna goes up of that doesn't sound right. Yeah. There's something wrong here. But yet then like you go talk to your parents, you're like, oh yeah, you didn't call about the gift cards? Like, so I feel like it's going to be interesting because AI and all these algorithms are only a benefit if you allow them to trick you into it. So even on your X feed or on LinkedIn or whatever feed, there is an algorithm that is driving what you're seeing. And so if you're not aware of that and you can't realize, okay, I may not typically click on this type of a thing, but I'm going to click on it just to try to screw with the algorithm here because I want to see this counterbalance of information on my feed. I think that's at some point what's going to happen is they're going to realize, oh, everyone's trying to game the algorithm, which then kind of defeats the purpose of the algorithm, which then hopefully brings about, what I would like is transparency on the algorithm so I can tune my algorithm how I want to tune my algorithm without it choosing how my algorithm should be tuned to try to get me addicted to something.
Yeah.
And I think that will be a very interesting process.
It's using you instead of you using it.
Right now it is, yes.
Yeah.
But imagine if you got to choose like how you tune your algorithm. Like, do you really want things to be filtered by the number of things that get the most likes? Mm-hmm. Because that has always been one of the odd, I think Elon's talked about this before. It's always been one of the odd things that clicking a like button shows engagement with it and therefore shows it up on more people's feeds. Like that's just an odd thing where when I know when Elon came in, carried the sink into Twitter, let that sink in, and then he immediately started making a lot of changes. But one of the very interesting things was when you started to see a view count of a post, how many eyes actually saw it versus how many likes did it get? How many random comments did it get? That was very interesting to me because now I see how far my actual reach is on my thing, not just how many can I get enough of a knee-jerk reaction to get enough people clicking a like button on it. So I do think in the future, the ability to tune algorithms will be a very interesting thing. But it's also going to be look at it from the business perspective, they treat those algorithms as their proprietary secret sauce. That's how they created the crack that got everyone addicted, for example, on YouTube when you're going down these weird rabbit holes. So I just think at some point, humans are going to wise up to the value. Humans are going to wise up to what these algorithms are doing to them. And then these companies are going to have to change. And it'll be very interesting at that point.
When the chickens come home to roost, it'll be something pretty wild.
Yeah. That was a random tangent.
You were very passionate about it.
Well, because I probably spent way too many hours thinking about it without actually knowing what I'm actually thinking about type deal.
Yeah.
But I just think there was a podcast episode of Armchair Expert, which is Dax Shepard's podcast. And he had on the individual who wrote Homo Sapiens. I'm going to not know his name, and I cannot pronounce his name, but he came out with a new book about, I can't even remember what the new book was about. I haven't read it, but they were that's why they had him on the podcast to talk with him, and he was talking about his new book. But one of it was you start to realize that historically, the folks with the most power have been the editors who are able to choose what the masses get to see.
Yep.
And so what we're going to now experience is if you take off, like right now, the algorithms are the editors.
Right.
But imagine if you get to tune your own editor, make your own editor, or say, I don't want any algorithm. I literally want to see it based on,
when someone uploads.
Correct. I'll choose my certain people, and when they last uploaded, that's when I want to see it. So I think it'll just be interesting to see how that continues to progress.
Interesting times ahead for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Where can they find you online, Rob, if you want to reach out, connect, learn more?
I am most proactive on LinkedIn.
Are you using ChatGPT for your posts or what?
I do not use ChatGPT for my posts. If you read my posts, you will realize I do not use ChatGPT. I don't post as much as I would like. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me. Just Rob Gerlach.
Nice. And then what's your social security number?
Yeah, I've been told I'm not supposed to give that out.
Not anymore?
Not anymore.
Okay. You can find me at Jacob O'Connor. The podcast is at Real Period Conversations. If you enjoyed the episode, please make sure to share it with a friend. Rob, looking back at this really interesting journey you've been on of life recently, what advice would you give to your 23-year-old self?
So it's sad that I don't have a canned answer for this because I knew it was coming. I think looking back on it, what I would tell my 23-year-old self is to the value of networking. I don't think I truly understood until, after I got my first job out of law school, and I was talking with a colleague who's like all about networking, and now I've seen where she's gone. She's a general counsel of an AI startup that's doing very well. And what's interesting is she told me that one time, and it like just clicked suddenly, like, there is value in networking. And so from that point forward, I always was much more proactive in networking on LinkedIn and other aspects like that. And it's really changed a lot of parts of my life. It's opened a lot of doors that would have otherwise not been opened. So I think the one thing I would have told my 23-year-old self is to network with literally everybody throughout the process. And it's as easy as just being really polite to people and being nice and interested in what they have to say.
Just being a good person.
Just being a good, empathetic, authentic person.
Nice.
See what we did there?
That's beautiful. Thanks for coming on, Rob.
Thank you.